Welcome to Keeping It Real, the largest podcast made by real estate agents and for real estate agents. My name is DJ Paris. I am your guide and host through the show. Today on the show is our monthly series called the Monday Market Minute with Carrie McCormick from the Carrie McCormick Real Estate Group with At Properties here in Chicago. Now, Carrie is a top 1% producer here in Chicago with over 20 years of experience helping buyers, sellers, and investors. In fact, past 12 months we're up to 40, almost 47,000 realtors in our area. Carrie is routinely in the top 15 of highest producers. And when I say not 15%, literally the top 15 out of 47,000 producers. So she is a true superstar and an expert in everything from first-time home buyers, veteran investors, and luxury properties. She also works with a lot of developers and is often chosen to represent these high-end developments. Please visit Carrie at her website, which is carriemccormickre.com. Also, please follow her on Instagram. She routinely gets awards for having one of the very best realtor IG accounts. So please, let's all check out, and you can get inspiration from some of the posts that she makes. Her Instagram is at Carrie McCormick. That's McCormick real estate. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, so you don't have to type it in. But Carrie, welcome once again to the show.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually impressed that you remember how to spell my name. There's a lot of C's in there. There's a lot. So thank you.
I just recently did an episode, and I don't think it's released yet, but by the time this one releases, it'll be released. And I literally got to the end of the interview, which was over an hour, and I realized I had called the person the wrong first name. And I said, "Did I do that throughout the interview?" And he's like, "Yeah, a bunch of times."
Oh my God.
So I try to now be a little bit more aware of people's names, but it has happened. So I am just glad to remember not that I would ever forget your name, but it is funny. Sometimes it happens. So Carrie and I were actually, before we have a different topic that we want to go over today, which I think is going to be a great one around negotiation. But before that, I was actually asking Carrie about her business, and she was telling me a scenario about a client that was interested possibly in moving and selling their existing home, but they were locked in at a very, very low rate. With, a lot of us refinanced in the last several years, or we bought properties at, 3% rates, or, 4% or whatever it was at the time. And obviously that makes it sometimes more challenging when somebody today then wants to sell and is now going to maybe get a 5.5% rate or a 6% rate, or, whatever it might be today. So, Carrie, let's talk about that, because I think this is happening to a lot of agents where their clients are like, I don't want to give up my rate.
Yeah, and it's a real scenario. And I met with a client that asked me to come to their home. Obviously, they wanted to sell their home, or they're thinking about selling their home. And we just got into the nitty gritty of what they were looking to do. And he kind of barked back at me and he said, well, I've got a 1.875% interest rate, 30-year fixed on this house, which was mind blowing, which I've never seen that before. But he looked at me, he said, well, why should I sell my house? It does not make financial sense for me to sell my house. And he was a financial guy, and he went through like all of his scenarios and the cost to carry and appreciation and all of this stuff. And I'm just looking at him, and, as when he got done talking about his scenario, I just looked back at him and I said, you asked me to come to your house. You invited me here to talk about selling your home. So put the interest rate aside, right? That's something I can't change, or it's real. Is why do you want to move? Why are you thinking of moving? And then we started in this conversation about, what their next steps are in life and why they're moving. Kids are out of the house. Obviously the house is too big for them. They want to travel more. They want a lifestyle where they can just lock the door and walk away, and someone's handling their packages. They don't have to worry about the roof or, water leaks, etc. So then we started in that conversation, which is the real reason that they want to move, right? And I said to them, and this is where, as realtors, we become consultants to our clients, and it's kind of like a lifestyle consultant. Okay, well, you have a choice. You could either keep the big house with your 1.875% interest rate. You can rent it out, right? And then that comes with a whole slew of issues and problems, etc. Or you can stay in this house and travel and, have a house manager and worry about your leaks and your roof, etc. Or you give up that interest rate and you start living the life that you want. And
Mhm.
you know, 6% interest rates aren't going to be around forever. Will he ever get that 1%? Whatever he had? Absolutely not. But that's a trade off, right? And that became a discussion, which was kind of like a therapy session for them. And they have not decided yet what they're going to do. That was just the other day. But that's what made me think of that is, it's having these, conversations with our clients of their lifestyle and what they want in their life. And I think that's become more important to buyers and sellers these days. It's not just a house. I mean, it really is a home, that old saying. And it's how you're going to live your life in them and what's important to you.
Yeah, yeah, and there is sort of a I don't want to say it a reckoning, but a decision that ultimately they have to make where they have to just be willing to either give up the rate or not.
Mhm. Right.
And that can seem like a big decision, and it can seem like, well, that just doesn't make sense. We'll just stay. And then
Mhm.
you have to sort of suss out the other reasons like you were doing about why they may still want to consider doing that, because it's not necessarily a bad financial decision. It just doesn't feel good to go
Right.
from one rate to another.
Right.
But also too, it's like people don't, especially for the agent, sorry, especially for the buyers that in the last few years wanted that had these rates that they were pre-approved for and didn't get the homes that they wanted. They I could even see that being an issue too, where somebody's like, well, now I can't afford as much as I could 2 years ago when the rates were
Right.
at 3%. And but then the other thing is like, well, they don't maybe think, or they just wouldn't know that people who did get homes at that time oftentimes overpaid. And so maybe it kind of washes itself out a little bit if they buy something today and the interest rate's higher, and then in 2 years maybe they refinance. Do you end up having a lot of those conversations too with people that
All
are
the
like,
time.
well, yeah,
All the time. Yeah, and that's why it's important for us as brokers to do our homework too, and just coming up with solutions and having these conversations with our clients. And that's goes into also one of my, I'll go through my negotiation tips, but there's a lot of egos too, right? And with clients either who didn't win the house, want to win the house, didn't get the interest rate, whatever, everyone wants to feel like they won, and it, boils down to their ego. So it's understanding what moves your clients, what drives your clients, what's important to them, and having those conversations around there. So I may take a therapy class of how to, or psychology class of how to, talk with people a little bit more about this, but it's educational. It's fun.
well, yeah, let's talk about negotiation. So you obviously negotiate more than just about any realtor I know because of your production, and you do it all yourself, which is even more
Yeah.
impressive. So I would love to know how you think about negotiations, how you sort of play nicely with other realtors, but
Mhm.
still fighting for your clients, and
Yeah.
also how you manage your clients' expectations.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's become a hot topic. Um, it's time too, right? When you get to the point where you're in negotiations, it's all about time with your clients, and everyone's got valuable time. And this goes back to the ego too. Negotiations can be emotional for everybody involved. So first and foremost, I always like to say, as real estate brokers, we are a fiduciary to our clients. And some people don't even know what that really means. And what that does mean is we're obligated by law to act in our client's best interest rather than operating out of our own self-interest. And I think too, with negotiations, when you've got two brokers involved, sometimes it does, ego gets in the way too. Everyone wants to win, but we've got to put that aside. Can you hear that cat in the background?
I do. I hear a very noisy cat. It's totally
Yeah.
okay. Keep going. It's actually kind of
Um,
nice to
Hopefully that
hear.
cat's not gonna come over here, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But obviously negotiations, I forgot where I left off, but negotiations are very important to closing every deal. And some agents go in with guns blazing, they're ready to fight, they start throwing out recent comps and, this house closed 10 years ago at this, and, they start very negative, I think, and they start talking negatively about the client's property. Um, But I think once we get to the point of negotiations, we have a buyer, we have a seller. Let's look at this instead of a fight. Let's look at this negotiation as an opportunity to reach an agreement. And that's all it is. It's, we don't need to sling back and forth. So I put together three, what I think good steps are to start a negotiation. And I've learned this throughout the years. And the first one is, um, this is kind of common, but do your research. Obviously, do your research on the property, do your research on the market, and also do research on your client's personality, because I think it's important to understand the psychology of where your clients are coming from in negotiations, and that also goes to the seller side. So you can actually very quickly go onto Google, find out, hopefully you know what your client does for a living, but kind of dig deeper into what they do. Dig deep into what your opposing side does as well. That's going to give you some traits on their personality, and how they're going to react to the negotiations. Whether
That was
someone's analytical or someone wants to fight. You can kind of tell by some of their online profiles.
I see. So you would be looking at maybe their social media, also maybe any like videos they may have put on YouTube, or things like that, or articles they may have written, or just
Yeah.
anything about them online. Is that
Absolutely, because if they're in the profession, either they've attended conferences or they've written speeches or they've spoken or they give their opinion on certain things, you really can, get an idea whether someone wants to be a fighter in situations, whether they want to be the winner in it, or if, again, they're more data driven and they need to have that data in front of them. It's just a really good small step to take to understand their personality, right? Um, I also think, it's important to know the other side's client as well. So again, you're not just doing this just on your side, you're understanding the other side. For example, I've got agents that'll call and say like, okay, here's the offer. This is our best and final. We want an answer by 6 p.m. tonight. Like
right?
my client doesn't like that. My client wants to go back and forth a little bit. So when you are in the showings, I think that's a great time to get a read with the other agent. And sometimes I'll ask, Agent Joe, tell me a little bit about your seller, what's important to them. When do they need to move? So I'm kind of trying to qualify what's important to the seller. So when it comes to negotiations, I have a little bit of information and know how to propose this. Um, there's some people like to ping pong back and forth. Some people like to cut to the chase. So it's important to understand that so we have a successful outcome. And again, a lot of it is just asking questions, listening, which sometimes we don't as agents listen, but listen to what people are telling you so you know how to strategize it correctly. I just had a scenario, actually, while we're on this podcast, I may get the answer to this. But for example, this is a real life scenario. We've been negotiating back and forth on a deal for 3 weeks. And we've had interior designers in this space. We've had contractors in this space. I'm on the seller side. The buyer has brought in all of these and we've accommodated all of this. We are $25,000 apart on this deal. In the big picture, it's not that much. And not that I want to give away anyone's money or I don't want someone to overspend, but in the big picture, it's not that much. We got to a point where the buyer said, here's my best and final offer. You have 6 hours to make a decision. If you don't respond in 6 hours, our offer's off the table.
Okay.
I couldn't get a hold of my seller. 6 hours came and went. It was the 7th hour. The buyer said, we're done.
Wow.
So I thought, again, that's kind of where the ego comes into play. We've been negotiating this for 3 weeks. Both sides are mad at each other now. They don't even know each other, but they're mad at each other. So the broker and I are trying to bring this back together. We kind of let everyone's egos, cool down for a little bit. So actually, I communicated with the other broker this morning. She's going to talk to her client. I talked to my client. I said, this is kind of crazy to multi-million-dollar deal to end this over a 6-hour period, we couldn't respond to you. Anyways, she said she's going to talk to her client and get back to me. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned. We'll see if this deal comes together.
We'll
But
hang
that's
on. We'll hang on to see if see if you get an answer here in the next few minutes.
But again, that's part of our job, is understanding each side of it and understanding the clients. So I know that was a long-winded tip of the day, but I've got one more is, what was my last tip? Now I went into that story. Oh, it's just
Uh,
understanding like each and every,
the personality types,
the
yeah.
personality types in there. So we've also had clients where, the mom will come in or the dad will come in and is part of the decision maker. We'll have the kids that are involved in making a decision. So not only understanding the one that's signing the contract, but there's also other people in their lives that are helping them make the decision. And if you don't involve them or you don't understand that aspect of the deal, sometimes your deal could go sideways. And, again, we've got parents involved with the kids buying, we've got, grandparents that are lending money to people. There's all different parts of the deal that we need to understand. And all of that is discovered through getting to know your client and asking the right questions. That'll set you up for success when it comes to the negotiation.
I love all of that. Makes perfect sense, and it's just you said something really interesting that I wouldn't have thought of, which was the idea of going and sort of doing some research on your own client, seeing if you can determine personality
Mhm.
traits based on not necessarily you asking them, because sometimes when you ask people questions, they'll give you what they think is the answer that either you want to hear or that they feel comfortable saying, but
Right.
maybe isn't actually the truth. It's kind of like we have 700 realtors at our company, at your company of like 3 or 4,000. And if an email went out to every agent saying, "Hey, just curious, would you like more training, less training, or no training?" Everyone's going to say, "I want more training." And then when it actually comes to putting a training program together, maybe 20 agents out of 3,000 show up, or in our case, 10 agents out of 700.
Right.
And so we're like, well, everyone says they want more training. And then when we actually institute it. So I think what you said is actually quite smart, because if somebody says, like, oh, during negotiations, I absolutely love the back and forth, but and that, or maybe they don't say that, but you can kind of get a sense through their social
Mhm.
media that they're fighters, or they're aggressive, or they're maybe used to being in charge. That's maybe another part of it, is like
Right.
you probably deal a lot with, well, I know you deal with a lot with C-suite level, enterprise level people who
Mhm.
are, used to getting their own way, used to maybe snapping their fingers and having people underneath them do certain things. And so you probably treat those people differently, or have different, you probably approach them differently than you would people who don't have, a whole team that they're always managing and
Right.
controlling.
Right. No,
Yeah.
it is. And I've got a client who runs a company, and he's exhausted of making decisions all day, and he knows his business, and he looks at me and says, "What would you suggest?" And I give him my opinion. He's like, "Let's do it."
Isn't that the
So,
best kind of client?
and
I
it
that
was smoothest deal ever. But, but that was like he trusted me enough to make the decisions. And of course, that it was great. But again, that doesn't work for another client, right? So
Sure.
you do have to understand what motivates your clients. And, the internet's such a good tool out there for everybody.
Yeah, it's a great place to get a better sense of what your clients are actually like when they're not in front of you. I think that's a great point. It's funny. I was watching a video. It wasn't a video you made. It was another top producer here in Chicago, and I was sort of surprised this he even made this video, because he had a tip for agents who are dealing with multiple offers. And to me, this is the most obvious thing, but he clearly felt the need to do it because he probably sees that most agents don't do this. In fact, he gave examples. So here, I wanted to throw this your way and get your reaction. So he was saying, if you're in a multiple offer situation, if you're on the buyer side
Okay.
and you're dealing with multiple offers, he's like, the moment you send over, or as soon as you send over the offer, he's
Hmm.
like, you got to follow up with a phone call. It doesn't have to be that second, but you have to follow up with a phone call, text, like, especially if it's multiple offer. And I was like, well, I was watching this video. I'm like, doesn't everybody do that? And then he goes, the reason I'm making this video is I have 3 properties right now. They're in a multiple offer situations. We're getting like 10 offers per place, or whatever the number was. It was more than one.
Right.
And he said, not one agent, not one has called me to be like, hey, did you get the offer? How did it look? Do you want? He goes, they all just emailed it over.
Mhm.
And he's like, I'm just making this video for the good of realtors out there. So does that shock you to hear that? I mean, you must deal with that all the time too.
Yeah, I think even to take that a step further, sometimes, people use .loop or they use DocuSign.
Sure.
They will literally just forward the signed DocuSign over where so the email looks like it's coming from DocuSign. So
Right. So you
sometimes
don't even necessarily know that it's an offer. Yeah.
I don't even know it's an offer. I don't know who the agent is unless I go through it, and, that is bewildering to me that people just literally forward something, and you're right, um but again, everyone does their business differently, and, I just don't I think they're doing a disservice to their client by just forwarding an email, but nothing shocks me anymore. Everyone does something different, but kudos to whoever that was that made the video. I think that was hopefully a good people paid attention and listened and learned from that.
So for everyone out there, please call the other agent after you submit an offer, and even just to politely say, "Hey, just want to make sure you got it. If you have any questions, read through it." You want to play nice and really say, "I just want to," like what do you do when you send an offer?
Well, 100% call the agent and give them a look. I mean, that's
Of
like
course.
100% call the agent. And, like I'm advocating for my buyers, right? So I tell them a little bit about them. I think what's important for sellers to know too, and this is kind of my tip, is like if I'm representing a buyer, I'm the buyer's team, right? So we've got the buyer, we have the buyer's broker, we have the buyer's attorney, we have the buyer's inspector, right? So we're a team, and that's important for the seller to know who's on the other side advising this buyer. Not only are they picking the buyer and the buyer's terms, the seller wants to make sure that buyer's going to get across the finish line. And how is that buyer going to do that? By having a good team. The
Yeah.
attorney is important. The inspector is important. The mortgage lender is hugely important, and the broker is important. So there's 4 people on our side of the buyer's table that a seller should be concerned about. So that's what I like to highlight is Mr. and Mrs. Seller or sellers in general, look to see who the buying team is. They're the ones that are going to get that buyer across the finish line. So I think that's important to highlight as well.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I for my marketing tip of the week, just to pivot over, I wanted to get your idea about this. This isn't a new idea, and I'm reluctant to even say it because I feel like I say it every single time I do an episode. So I apologize to our listeners if you've heard this before, but I also think I've been hearing to work out all of my life, and I didn't actually take action until a few years ago, and I finally started working out. So even though you may have heard this before, I think it's still a good thing to hear again. But I want to get your take on it, and if
Okay.
you may disagree that this isn't a good idea. So I was thinking for anyone out there whose business is down, and let's face it, this is probably going to be a down year for most agents. At least most brokerages seem to be projecting that. Economists are projecting that for realtors. So we know this is going to be a tricky year to have high production numbers. But if I was practicing and I didn't have any clients right now, I was thinking of an idea of what would I do. And of course, this is where you come in because I want to get your thoughts. But if it was me, I am always thinking as an homeowner, I always want to know what my home is worth. I mean, I'm not looking to sell and I'm not looking to move,
Mhm,
but it's kind of like getting that credit score report every month
mhm,
where it just gives you your number. Like I don't do anything with my credit really, but I'm just kind of glad that I can see it every month. And it's
mhm.
like, thankfully I have a good credit score, but it's kind of just a little bit of a sort of checks and balances of my life going, oh, okay,
Yeah.
my credit's okay. Nobody opened up 10 credit cards in my name last month and spent a bunch of money. So I always think knowing your home value is kind of in that same category of
Mhm.
like, yeah, I probably won't do anything with the information, but it's good to know.
Right.
So if it was me, I would call every single person I know who owns a home, whether I was their realtor or not when they bought it, and I would say, "Hey, look, if you know they already have a realtor, like, hey, I know you already have an agent, but I was just practicing running some CMAs. I was, or rather, I run CMAs for everybody. I know you don't have to say you were practicing, and I wanted to send you what I think your home is actually worth, because what I found is that a lot of times, people who homeowners will go maybe just to Zillow, look at the Zestimate. We know that this is where the public goes, so they don't go really anywhere else. They go to Zillow, so we know that's where they go. We know they look at the Zestimate. As realtors, all of us, have certain feelings about Zestimate, like it or hate it. Regardless, it's not totally always going to be perfectly accurate, even though Zillow says it's within about 3 percentage points of accuracy, which may or may not be true. I don't know. But if people are only using that metric, and then you can come along and say, hey, by the way, I actually disagree a little bit with Zillow. I think your home is worth X, lower, higher, whatever. That is providing value.
Mhm.
So if it was me, I would be just constantly sending out CMAs to my people I know. What do you think about that? You feel free to disagree. I'm just curious what.
I like it. I think it's a great tip, and I think it depends on how many clients you have.
Yeah.
Um, the one thing that I've done just to kind of ease it was not a CMA, it was just a general market report in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And maybe that's kind of what you're talking about, because I feel like, and this is again just my opinion, that if I tell them where I think their value of their home is, and I don't know, maybe they've done updates to it and they get offended, by what I'm
Oh,
saying,
good point. Good point.
or, it's completely off. And then I look like I don't know what I'm talking about. So,
Or they disagree with it for whatever reason, and then you have
yeah.
to defend it.
So what I did actually is I sent out, just like if it's Lincoln Park, I'll send out a Lincoln Park report of, in the last quarter, how single family homes have been doing. And if you want to know where yours falls in, because there's always the charts and what's
Sure.
selling, what's not selling. If you want more to drill down on your home and get an accurate, CMA on your home, love to come over and chat with you. So I kind of leave it open to that.
That's a better way to do it. I actually like that better. So just to recap that idea. So instead of Carrie sending out a sort of a blind CMA and maybe having the person go, well, this doesn't make sense. I made all these upgrades, or she's got it wrong. She doesn't, you're right. It unless the number is significantly higher than what they expect, they're
Mhm.
probably going to have questions, or maybe feel like, well,
Yeah.
Carrie didn't really, maybe she didn't miss something or something. So I love that idea. So instead of saying that, you could say, hey, in the surrounding areas, I've noticed the homes in your area are actually up, 20% or whatever the number is. If you want to sort of do a deeper dive into your property, I can figure that out for you.
Yeah. And I
You're
like
right. That's a much safer way to do it. I love that.
And again, everyone's got their way of doing it. It's just it's easier, and it's allows, again, my goal is to provide value, or our goal is to provide value, but more importantly, I want to talk to them. I want them to pick up
Yeah.
the phone, or they want them to invite me to come over. So
So, okay. So I just want to drill a little bit deeper into this. So let's say I change my approach. I'm not going to just automatically run the CMA. I'm going to do a market report for their neighborhood, their
Mhm,
suburb, wherever, and I'm going to say, hey, I noticed that homes are up, or whatever the data is.
mhm.
I'd love to do a deeper dive with you. How do you? So then, are you going to email that to somebody? Are you going to call them? What works best for you when you have that kind of information you want to give to them?
So I feel like with email, people just delete it.
Yeah,
Personally, I
they
think, like,
do.
if it says, like, market report, or, your neighborhood update, or whatever
Right? Yeah,
your
nobody cares.
subject line is, I think that gets deleted personally. But I would do it 2 ways. I always print it. I shouldn't say always. I print it, and I put it in an envelope, and I mail it to them.
Love that.
And I hand address it, just because if it's a label,
Yeah.
they might throw it away. So I think there's a better chance that they're gonna open up the mail. And then the next following week, I will follow up with an email with a subject line, "Did you get the envelope with the market report?" And that way, it's a follow-up, and then I do have a hyperlink to that report, so if they did accidentally throw that envelope away, they can get it online.
Oh, that's
So,
smart. And do you get a pretty good response to those?
I do. I do. Or I've just gotten, like, a client of mine, Sam, he sent me an email, he said, "Thanks for the updated market report."
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, it's an acknowledgement of it, and it's a touch point, and Granted, he just bought his place a year ago, but it was a
Sure.
touch point. So yeah, I think I get good response from that.
I love that. Well, I think that's a great idea. So, for anyone out there who is in between clients or maybe wanting to provide some value in between deals, this is an opportunity. Do some neighborhood reports, some market reports, send it to everybody you know, and then offer them to do a more specific example with their own property if they're interested. I love that. That's really smart. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up for today. For everyone who is listening, I want you to think a couple of things. Number one, if you're not here in the local Chicago market, and 99% of our audience I think isn't, so for everyone out there who is working in a different area here, in US, Canada, wherever you might be listening from, if you have clients that are moving to Chicago, Carrie would love the opportunity to chat with them. She's a top producer. She works with a lot of relocation people. And anyway, anyone who's moving here, she would love the opportunity to connect with you if you have clients moving into the area. So please consider her for that. And then also, like I said at the beginning of the episode, please follow her on Instagram. In particular, she does all her own Instagram herself. It's amazing. And it's a great example of how you can. And what's really cool about Instagram too, is you can actually, for the most part, look at people's engagement, and you can actually look at other people's engagement to get a better sense of where you might want your engagement to land as far as likes, comments, etc., video views. So please follow her on Instagram, which is at Carrie McCormick Real Estate. Carrie, and one last thing, please, everyone, the best way you can help us as a podcast is by telling a friend. Think of one other realtor that could benefit from hearing this episode with Carrie today, which was awesome, and send them a link to our website. If they're not like a normal podcast listener and they don't normally, subscribe to shows, you can send them over to keepingitrealpod.com. Every episode we've ever produced can be streamed right from the browser, or if they are podcast listeners, they can just do a search for Keeping It Real and hit that subscribe button. So please tell a friend. That just helps us continue to reach more people, and we can do more episodes, and everybody wins. So Carrie, on behalf of the audience, that we thank you. You've been with us for years and years. You are an amazing guest on our show and a contributor, and I don't feel like we could do the same show without you, so I'm so glad you're still with us. And on behalf of Carrie and myself, we also want to thank all of our listeners and our viewers for continuing to support our show. So again, tell a friend, follow Carrie on Instagram at Carrie McCormick Art Real Estate, which, by the way, is linked to the Instagram, and her website, carriemccormickre.com, is in our show notes. So please visit both of those, and let's keep the train rolling. Carrie, great to see you. And
Thank you.
thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.